It is Thursday, April the 30th, 2020. This is the Distant Peasant Podcast, and I am your host, Jeff in Georgia. On today's show, the big-ass adventures of Big Bill Haywood. Yeah, when you look this guy up, his occupation is usually just listed as activist, which is about the lamest appellation you could ever give this legendary gentleman. Of course, before I get to all of that, just a brief reminder that this show, like all of these shows, is brought to you by listeners like you, people who have gone to patreon.com/distantpeasant, have become recurring donors for as little as $1 a month. In these uncertain times, especially, I want to thank each and every one of my supporters for giving me the time and space to do what I do on this show. We're back to form today. Just me and a script. No one else. But before I get to all that, just a brief aside that in the midst of the pandemic, I know that tens of millions of Americans are hurting. Probably a lot of them are my listeners, and I just want to let you know, I hope you're keeping well, or as well as can be expected. And if you're not, I hope that changes quickly for you. On with the show. Do you like The Lord of the Rings? It used to be more popular, generally speaking, and in recent years it's taken some hits for some lame and tired ideas. The hidden king of true and noble birth, the patriarchy of the societies the characters visit, the veiled racism the book conveys for the so-called wild men of the East, more and more. Still, J.R.R. Tolkien's voice is dead, both literally and metaphorically, and we need not take anything from his words beyond what we can justify. And there's one bit in The Fellowship of the Ring that I feel fondly towards, and I feel justified in this. Just to remind you of this story you've probably heard before, Frodo the unimportant halfling has arrived at a great council of the wise, with the Dark Lord Sauron's evil ring of power in his possession. And this council is about to send him far into the east to cast the ring into the fires of Mount Doom. Gandalf says to all, quote, "It is wisdom to recognize necessity, when all other courses have been weighed, though as folly it may appear to those who cling to false hope. Well, let folly be our cloak, a veil before the eyes of the enemy. For he is very wise, and weighs all things to a nicety in the scales of his malice. But the only measure that he knows is desire for power, and so he judges all hearts. Into his heart the thought will not enter that any will refuse it, that having the ring we may seek to destroy it. If we seek this, we shall put him out of reckoning. At least for a while, said Elrond. The road must be trod, but it will be very hard, and neither strength nor wisdom will carry us far upon it. This quest may be attempted by the weak with as much hope as the strong, yet such is oft the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do them, because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere." End quote. Small hands do them because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere. I've thought a lot about these words, more about them recently. Some tasks can only be accomplished by the ordinary and unimportant. And in Elrond's opinion at least, the destruction of the Dark Lord's power over them all is among these. The great and wise look elsewhere, but I am inclined to believe that this task is not for them, not because they aren't willing or are occupied, but because attempting to match strength with strength, power with power, great lord against great lord, this is the real path of folly. Great lords, whether good or evil, whatever good and evil truly mean, cannot liberate the people of Middle-earth. Because they are powerful in all else, they are powerless in this. The small folk have to liberate themselves and everyone else, if liberation is to be achieved at all. maybe all this is a little bit silly, reading Marxism backwards into Tolkien, but it makes me think of politics in America and elsewhere right now, even if that's definitely not what Tolkien was writing about. Non-stop hits of a Democratic Party existentially opposed to being driven by, let alone controlled by, labor interests, the pandemic and resulting economic depression, the suspension of elections, and more, all while the eyes of the great and wise are largely elsewhere. All of it serving to make the small feel even smaller, feel not just ordinary, but irrelevant and replaceable. But let's not get too gloomy. Once upon a time, there was a man whose hands, and really everything about his body and personality, was big. And yet he was not a great man of importance or wealth or power. He didn't obtain any high degrees from schools. He held no great public office. He was a plain old cowboy, homesteader, and miner. In this most crucial of ways, he was a small man. He worked for a living. But in doing that work, he discovered what those who ruled him thought he was worth. Now, some people at the time thought that the solution to being ruled unfairly was to push the ruling class to rule more fairly. And so they worked to elect representatives and pass laws to enforce this and that, and force the owners of their operations to shorten work shifts, better their laborers' conditions, increase their pay, etc. And indeed, they did win some elections, and they did get some laws passed. And yet things did not improve, and our hero could see it plain as anyone else. And so he realized, I think, the same thing that Elrond gives the reader as wisdom in the Fellowship of the Ring. Such is often the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world, that even though the path is perilous and hard, if the working class is to gain, they must gain for themselves. Big Bill Haywood was born in 1869. Salt Lake City, Utah territory, though he was not of a Mormon family. His father was a former Pony Express rider who was tasked with riding hard in order for news and post to travel at our world's maximum speed over land, a max speed which hadn't changed for thousands of years, but which was about to drastically increase with the invention of the adoption of the locomotive. He died when Bill was but 3. The one memory Bill relates of him was on his 3rd birthday, when his father picked him up and took him to town. He bought little Bill his first pair of pants, went through the town getting Bill loaded up with money, candy, and oranges, and he died not too long afterwards. When word of his sickness reached the family, his mother took Bill to him, but they arrived too late to say goodbye. Bill dug down into his father's fresh grave as far as his hands would allow, but he was gone. As a wee lad, Bill was growing up in the Wild West, mining camps full of tough and hard men, Mormons of various levels of piety and faction, cowboys and gold rushes, Native Americans, the growth of the railroad, farming and ranching work, guns and horses plenty. As a little boy of 7, one of his schoolmates accidentally shot and killed another boy, with a gun hidden beneath a pillow where they were playing. Big Bill watched the lifeblood leave little Willie Duke, and saw the white-faced frozen terror upon Pete Bethel's face. He saw Slippery Dick shoot and kill Manny Mills, who shot at him first, and heard the explosion when someone tried to blow up the town's hotel. He caught a bad cramp while swimming in a river once. Joe Cutler saved him from drowning. He saw the lynching of a black man, and it affected him greatly, especially what happened after the victim had stopped breathing, when the crowd was on the verge of tearing his body into pieces before the mayor ordered the body returned to the town jail, but made no other moves that night to affect the situation. All this is to say, this was a time when life was cheap, and sudden death, even violent death, much more common than it is now. I do not know whether courage is cultivated when one is forced to look at death directly, for it seems to me about as likely that such experiences might cultivate fear in a person. But in Big Bill's case, he writes that his death became natural to him, and even before beginning to grow up, he had already accepted it as the way of the world. He was famously blind in one eye, but would almost always turn his head in profile for pictures to avoid showing it off. But he didn't lose it in a fight with a scab or at a worksite accident. He just wanted a slingshot, like all the other boys had, and was trying to cut a handle for one with a knife when it slipped and caught him in the eye. He was treated immediately and even kept in a dark room for months in an attempt to get his sight to heal. It never did. Kids used to like to call him Squint Eye or Dick Deadeye, and Bill used to like to fight them. His first real job was when he was hired out by contract as a boy to a man named John Holden. As boy of all work on the farm for the summer months, he milked the cows and fed the calves, cleaned up manure, fetched this and that. But most of the time he drove a yoke of oxen through a field for plowing. While at this once, he uncovered a nest of field mice and was fascinated by their neat little home, their tiny closed eyes, their red and hairless bodies. He was pondering this small wonder of nature when his reverie was interrupted by the sharp crack of sound and force upon his body. The whip he had dropped to examine the mice was in the hands of Mr. Holden, who had struck him with it without saying a word. Bill jumped up and ran to the house, grabbed the few belongings he had with him, packed up, and walked 10 miles home. Bill calls this his first strike. It ended in limited victory for labor. Hooray! Bill returned home. Mr. Holden came and admitted to his mother that he had used the whip on the boy and was sorry about it. He promised not to do it again, and so his working conditions were improved slightly when he returned to the farm. As an aside, his given name at birth was William Richard Haywood, Richard being the name of the uncle who had just bound him out to Holden's farm, and he decided to change it to William Dudley Haywood, Dudley being the name of his late father. His mother said all that was fine, but for it to really count, you had to be confirmed in church. Bill did this and was confirmed officially as a follower of Jesus Christ of the Episcopalian variety. He never attended church again. I don't know if things would have gone differently if Big Bill had never experienced being bonded to an employer by contract as Holden's boy of all work. With Bill getting older, his mother was getting antsy that he should learn a trade, and the man next door made boilers. They got as far as drawing up the papers to be signed, but Bill balked hard at an apprenticeship, not wanting ever again to be bound by contract to a job he could not quit whenever it pleased him. If Bill had become a boilermaker, how could he ever become a leader in the Western Federation of Miners and in the IWW? Would he have become a Gompers-style accommodationist in some craft union somewhere? Would he have become a prosperous and settled family man with less interest in politics? Would another Big Bill have risen up in the West? It's impossible to know. But when Holden lost his temper and struck Bill with that whip, forever making him unwilling to apprentice with anyone, he might have greatly changed the course of history. Because instead of becoming a boilermaker, his stepfather decided he could use Bill out at the mine he supervised in Nevada. He was 15 years old. Here he experienced life in a remote mining camp, where the nearest town of any consequence was dozens of miles away and could only be got to by walking or riding. He had but one best friend during this time, there being no boys of his age around, Tim the dog. Now you may laugh at me here, but from our perch in time, writers and historians frequently point out in the biographies of meaningful people the friends and family who are not famous, but who nonetheless made the hero possible. I view Tim the dog the same way, just as I view the Bolshevik queen of letters Helen Keller and her little dog Fizz. It's pretty uncommon to highly value the working class's champions, and even more uncommon to note the names of less famous people who helped them become who they were, and still more uncommon to note the name of a dog, who yet also made them who they were. So here I pause and honor good old Tim, whom Big Bill regarded as a fuzzy person, and who insisted that something other than instinct must rule his mind, even if Tim couldn't properly think. Tim was there for Bill, Bill was there for Tim, And in a hard world, an island of tenderness was created by them, together. Good boy, Tim. He learned about the Native Americans who used to live in that land. Bill once asked a Paiute, called Ox Sam by the settlers, why the white men kill Indians. Direct quote. Ox Sam responded with a story of how they had lived and squabbled a bit among the tribes before the white man's arrival. First came the small farmers, and that was pretty good, he says. They married the women of the tribes, and so they were all mixed together. More white men came, now prospectors and small miners. This, too, was pretty good, or at least not so bad, in his opinion. These men dug holes all the time, made big piles of rock, but they didn't stay in one place for very long. Then came soldiers. These men were different. They had no farms, dug no holes, lived in big houses all together without families, constantly prattled about Uncle Sam, and introduced them to whiskey. Things got much worse after the soldiers, and soon enough the Paiute people were hunted same as coyotes, he says. He himself went down to the river with others to get some goose and duck. The men, women, children ambushed and killed. All but 2 infants adopted by an officer and Ox Sam himself, who mounted a horse and rode away as fast as he could. He rode into the mountains, hid for a long time. His father, his mother, his sisters and brothers, he never saw any of them ever again. Such were the stories young Big Bill would ask after, and the sorts of things that affected him. He also met someone quite a bit older than him, but who was pretty important in his life. They even became friends. Now, Bill was only 17, and Pat Reynolds was the oldest man working in the camp and a veteran of the Knights of Labor. Now, Bill could not yet understand the need for such an organization. Now, he noted to Pat that the boss slept and ate with them, was not that much better compensated. It seemed to him that they were equal enough. Pat explained to Bill that that was not the real boss of the mine, that those mines and all the big ranches and farms, too, they were owned by a class of men out in California's cities, while the enterprises were created and made productive by the working men and women of the West. It was when they were together that the Haymarket Massacre occurred and grabbed national headlines. Radical labor action, class conflict, the 8-hour day, and anarchism were topics of conversation for the everyday person, including these mining campers. Bill read all the news he could get about it, and the words of the men condemned for the crime. He talked with Pat of the many questions he had about all this. Quote, I was trying to fathom in my own mind the reason for the explosion. Were the strikers responsible for it? Was it the men who were their spokesmen? Why were the police in Haymarket Square? Who threw the bomb? It was not Albert Parsons or anyone he knew, for if it had been, why did Albert Parsons walk into court and surrender himself? Who were those that were so anxious to hang these men they called anarchists? Were they of the same capitalist class that Pat Reynolds was always talking to me about? The last words of August Spies kept running through my mind. There will come a time when our silence will be more powerful than the voices you are strangling today. It was a turning point in my life, end quote. Bill worked at this mine and that one. Notably, he remarks that the lead mining he witnessed and did was particularly horrific, with all its dangers of mining generally coupled with lead poisoning. He married a woman, his sweetheart, Nevada Jane Minor, Minor. They had a child, a boy, who tragically never lived long enough to receive his name. Bill did a bit of cowboy work for a while, and relates the story of how his brother-in-law Tom broke a particularly wild horse he called Rockin' Chair. He became a homesteader, and yet again things might have swung a different way. Big Bill loved being a homesteader. He loved taking his mining money and putting it towards his own little plot, granted Tim free and clear by Uncle Sam himself. Loved that every scrap of work he did on that homestead was for him and his. It was on his homestead, around the now abandoned army post of Fort McDermott, that his first surviving child was born, Henrietta, which he delivered himself, cut the umbilical cord and all, though this was never their plan, and he was a wreck from beginning to end of labor. The thing that could have gone a different way was this. In 1893, Big Bill received a form letter from the U.S. government, the very same that had invited him to homestead the land and own it in time, if he improved it. This was now suddenly reassigned to be reservation land after all, and every bit of work and money he had put into improving the land was gone. There is no hint of bitterness on Bill's part to the natives here. He was devastated, angry, and broke besides, but he reserved his malevolent feelings for Uncle Sam exclusively, who had pulled the rug out from under him. If Uncle Sam had not declared this land homestead land in the first place, or had kept it homestead land, or even had offered compensation for Bill's labor and wealth to find some other way for him to make his way in the world, the Big Bill we know today would not exist. But Uncle Sam did not do that, and so Bill was in trouble. The whole national economy was in a severe slump. Unemployment was chronic at this time, and would end up being years before something approaching stability would return to his working life. In the meantime, he was hit with what he called a great rift of light while he muddled in the darkness. And along with the events at the Haymarket, no other national event was probably as formative to Big Bill's politics as the Pullman strike in 1894, so let us discuss it briefly. At the risk of oversimplification, here's basically what happened as Bill saw things, and I'm inclined in large part to agree with his takes. During the severe recession that was then befalling the country, demand for passenger cars from the Pullman Palace Car Company fell drastically. In response, Pullman cut wages and didn't just not reduce already high rents and fees at his company towns, in some cases he raised them. A strike began among the workers, or a boycott as they called it. The idea was that for any train that had a Pullman car on it, the American Railway Union, founded by Eugene V. Debs, who will now be appearing here and there for the remainder of this series, would refuse to run it. The Pullman Company retaliated by hiring strikebreakers, which led to increased hostilities between the workers and scabbed-up management. Many of these strikebreakers were black, and the union itself not exactly woke on issues of race. Still, within days, sympathy strikers and agitators began to appear in the West, who walked off their own jobs, blocked railroad tracks, and started fucking with scabs. They seemed very close to victory. The fact that they didn't win is due to some things beyond their helping, like a huge invasion of the federal army, but also due to at least one thing that might have been within their power to change. And this was Big Bill's big takeaway. There was no helping the massive propaganda campaign against them in the press, and little they could do to directly match the power of federal troops. But importantly, there were many outside the American Railway Union who either belonged to no union or to a smaller craft union. Smaller unions of conductors and whatnot, under the control of the completely co-opted Samuel Gompers of the American Federation of Labor. When Debs called for a general strike of all workers in Chicago to support their efforts, Gompers opposed it, opposed his union men walking off the job with Debs' ARU members, opposed workers driving management to settlement, opposed taking over the whole damn enterprise. Big Bill's got nothing but contempt for Gompers and these types. These small-minded union leaders in bed with the bosses, liking nothing more than being the stick with which the rest of the working class is held at bay. Union-branded scabs. It would be better if as many workers who had anything to do with the rail system had been unionized under one organization, to maximize labor's ability to paralyze the industry and keep it so till they got what they wanted. This idea, which is just now getting its name in history, is called industrial unionism, where all workers, regardless of skill or job level in an industry, are unionized together. If we don't allow ourselves to be divided into different unions, Bill thought, we might yet prevail. The press and army be damned. One union, and a big one. That's the ticket. This idea will become incredibly important, culminating in the formation by Big Bill and others of the Industrial Workers of the World, usually just called the IWW. All of that is a bit ahead. Before he can be part of the IWW, he'll need to be a bit more famous. After Haywood struggled for years to find steady and decent work, he left Nevada, and the place he had assumed he'd lived for many years, and arrived in Silver City, Idaho. Here he learned of his first agent provocateur, a man from the Pinkerton Detective Agency, who successfully infiltrated the Irish secret society, the Molly Maguires, the power and even existence of which is still debated among scholars today. Bill relates that he and the proverbial everyone knew a bit about the Molly Maguires in the mines. They were considered by Bill and others to be a pro-working class body, who would never stand for any reduction of wages amongst the miners. A murder and some other crimes this detective helped pin on about a dozen of them, and though they were a radical group not opposed to using violence and intimidation against the ownership class, they were certainly prosecuted in large part because of what they stood for, not because of what they did that could be proven. Some people even go further and maintain the whole job was a fabrication from start to finish, and that there really was no such group that capital created for itself a dastardly villain to vanquish. I do not know the truth, but I do know that this Pinkerton detective was real, a real agent provocateur, and that Bill relates that he did ingratiate himself on false pretenses and did it all on behalf of his boss, who was hired by yet another boss, all to keep the miners complacent, not to improve the safety and security of the people as a law and order-minded businessman. In 1896, Bill suffered a severe accident with a mine car. His right hand was completely crushed, and the state of medicine at the time advised him that it would be safer to amputate the hand. He was horrified at the prospect of being blind in one eye and losing his right hand, and begged the doctor to do all he could to avoid amputation. It would never be the same, but Bill did keep his hand, though he could never mine like he used to. Big Bill's story might have ended here. Unable to work, his bosses could cast him aside for someone who could. He might have been discarded and forgotten only in his late 20s, as so many people were back then, and so many are discarded and forgotten now. But fortunately for Bill, and for all who must toil to live, he was not forgotten. The same miners who made just about what he did, lived like he did, and were considered as replaceable to the mine owners as he was, they remembered Big Bill when they heard what happened to him. From what they were paid, which was far too little, each gave a piece of their wages, and when collected together they presented it to Bill as a gift. His wife and daughter had just arrived in Silver City to live with him. He couldn't work, and just when he needed it, it was a purse of money for his emergency. Not from the government, not from his boss, from his fellow miners, and of a generous size. It is not too far to say they probably saved his life. Shortly after this, a man named Ed Boyce showed up to camp to explain to the men the benefits of joining the Western Federation of Miners. Bill was enthusiastic. The miners had just got done showing him personally the power of an organized workplace, and he had developed a pretty sophisticated class consciousness. 4 years after this, he will be on the executive board of the Western Federation of Miners. After 6, he will be the secretary-treasurer, the number 2 position. After 8, he will found the Industrial Workers of the World. Through that time, he will suffer beatings, jailings, and at the end of it all, de facto exile from the country of his birth. And yet he will never waver in his core belief that the world should belong, must belong, will belong, damn it, to that great mass of ordinary and unimportant people called workers. Next time, Big Bill's big-ass adventures will continue, and through Western wars between labor and capital and his famous trial for allegedly murdering the former governor of Idaho, his faith in this will grow only stronger, and his enemies ever more determined to eliminate him. Thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it. Wow, it is amazing that anybody hears this ever. It has been a little bit since I really sat down and composed something that was nice and researched for you with a tad of spit polish, I'll say. And so I hope you appreciate the time and effort it takes to make something like that that's even a little bit good. Patreon.com/DistantPeasant is the place you can show your appreciation. I take donations at paypal.me/DistantPeasant as well. See you next time.